along with some light outbreaks of rain, mainly for the Northern Isles and the Northwest Highlands, I think. But elsewhere, well, 20 to 24 Celsius, so feeling pleasant enough in the sunshine. Into the evening, and the cloud and rain tends to sink south across northern Scotland, and then it reaches parts of Northern Ireland after midnight, as well as the central belts, but it tends to fizzle out by this stage, and mainly it's western coasts and hills that sees the most damp weather overnight. 13 Celsius for Scotland and Northern Ireland overnight, a milder night here because of the cloud cover. Further south across England and Wales, 8 or 9 for many, but low single figures possible for some sheltered southern areas where we've got light winds and plenty of sunshine to start the day on Tuesday, and temperatures soon rising as a result. The cloud in the north tends to sink further south into northern England, and 1 or 2 showers will develop as skies brighten, mainly eastern Scotland, perhaps the odd one over the Pennines, for example. However, away from those areas, it's another dry and fine day, and again, wall-to-wall sunshine virtually for southern parts of the UK. Warming up as well over the next few days with that sunshine, and it looks like temperatures will peak on Thursday in the south with 29 Celsius possible for much of England. Further north, it's cooler and cloudier.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the day's big issues that we need to look at in depth. Nothing is off the table and no one will be cancelled for saying what they think. Keeping me company today is Christopher Hope from the Daily Telegraph, a good friend of this show. And here's what we're talking about. Strikes, strikes, and yet more strikes. As the UK faces the biggest rail walkout in 30 years, teachers, doctors and now barristers are threatening to get in on the act. Are we heading for a summer of discontent? Plus, Britain's new army chief tells his troops to be ready to fight Russia. But just how serious should we take that warning? And is the swimming governing body right to ban trans swimmers from women's elite competition? That's what we're talking about for the next hour. What do you need to get off your chest? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet the programme @GBNewsFirst. It's time for GB News headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon. It's just 1 minute past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News.
Downing Street has confirmed it's not taking part in last-minute talks with unions and industry chiefs ahead of this week's rail strikes. The industrial action is due to start tomorrow. It's going to severely disrupt travel, with some train cancellations starting today. Unions are accusing the government of inflaming tensions in England, but Number 10 insists the offer on the table is fair and reasonable pay rise. The disruption is set to affect businesses which have been struggling financially after the pandemic. UK Hospitality Chief Executive Kate Nichols says her sector will be hit hard.
Our businesses are reporting that there's a high level of cancellations of pre-booked events, activities, lunches, dinners that were due to take place next week, particularly in our towns and city centres where those businesses have struggled to recover from COVID. So we are seeing a dip in footfall and a dip in revenue that's anticipated to be about 20%. It's worth £500 million to the economy.
Well, let's have a quick look at the days impacted. There's going to be strikes tomorrow on both the national rail network as well as the London Underground. Then on Thursday and Saturday, there's further nationwide action as the RMT union and 13 other train operators continue their walkout. A severely reduced timetable has been introduced with just 50% of the rail network open between 7:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. Other sectors could also see strikes this summer, with 2 teaching unions threatening to ballot their members. The National Education Union and NASUWT say teachers' pay has fallen by 20% in real terms since 2010. They're demanding a pay rise that's more in line with inflation. Heathrow Airport has asked airlines flying from Terminals 2 and 3 to cancel 10% of their scheduled flights today. It's after EasyJet announced it's cutting thousands of summer flights to avoid last-minute cancellations. The move's also in response to caps imposed by Gatwick and Amsterdam Schiphol airports. Energy companies are going to be prevented from charging high direct debits under plans put forward by the regulator Ofgem. The proposals also include rules to protect customers' credit balances and green levy payments if a company goes bust. Suppliers will also be required to have enough money to make sure they can weather future shocks. The Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy is being investigated over allegations that he breached ministerial rules on registering financial interests. He faces claims about earnings, gifts and foreign travel. The Parliamentary Standards Commissioner launched an official code of conduct review last week. The Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says he's absolutely confident the MP for Tottenham has not broken any rules. The new head of the British Army has warned that troops must be prepared to fight in Europe as the war in Ukraine continues. General Sir Patrick Sanders says it's imperative that the army's ready to fight and win wars on land. Former senior military intelligence officer Philip Ingram says the UK's armed forces have to be prepared.
Always the danger, the longer a war goes on, that it's going to spill over somewhere. Or something has to happen. The international community says enough is enough and something has to go in and try and mop it up and stop it. So it's important that, our military, especially the British military, our professional military, are ready, equipped, trained to take on any conflict.
Meanwhile, EU foreign ministers are meeting in Luxembourg to discuss the food crisis caused by Russia's blockade of Ukraine's Black Sea ports. Ukraine is one of the world's top wheat suppliers, but more than 20 million tonnes of grain has been stuck in silos since Russia invaded. The EU's Foreign Affairs spokesman, Joseph Borrell, accused Russia of using hunger as a weapon.
This is a real war crime, so I cannot imagine that this will last much longer. Otherwise, it would be really something that Russia will be accountable for. You cannot use the hunger of the people as a war arm.
The Bank of England has confirmed an affordability test for mortgage lending will be ditched from August. The average price of a home in the UK has now hit a record high for the 5th consecutive month. Rightmove says the average asking price is now almost £370,000. It expects the pace of growth will slow in the second half of the year because of interest rate rises and the increased cost of living. The Duke of Cambridge has pledged to continue highlighting homelessness and to introduce his children to charities supporting rough sleepers. Prince William turns 40 tomorrow, and he's written an article in The Big Issue about his experience selling the magazine on the streets of London earlier this month. As an 11-year-old, the Duke was taken to a homeless shelter by his mother, Princess Diana, as she sought to widen his horizons. This is GB News, and I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to Alex. Well, they say misery loves company. But when it comes to strikes, it seems that 3 and then you're out does not apply this summer. Like a pandemic of opportunism, the unions are agitating for industrial action in schools, hospitals, basically anywhere there's a public sector worker. Well, let's get something straight. If you're fortunate enough to be taxpayer funded, you probably had furlough paid for by the people you're trying to hack off. You have a pension guaranteed by taxes paid on the blood, sweat and tears of the people you want to prevent getting to work. Your holidays, half days and healthy hours are in part gifted by the fact other people graft beyond the call of duty and pay tax on the lot of it. Without the private sector churning away, without the protections and privileges of public workers, the country's economy would implode. And with it, the taxes that pay your wages. Almost everyone is facing the widening gap between what they earn and how much stuff now costs. So before you make it even more difficult to allow people to crack on with their jobs by closing their kids' schools and blocking their commute while asking them to pay you more, perhaps it's time to take stock of reality. Well, let's talk first. The head of public policy at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Matthew Lesh. Matthew, what sort of impact is this going to have on the economy, do you think?
Look, this will have a substantial impact. Of course, unlike perhaps historically, there are a lot of people who can work from home. But at the same time, if you're a student who needs to get into school, particularly for GCSE exam, you're going to find this very difficult. For people who are going up to Glastonbury or going to concerts in London, for the UK hospitality industry, that's obviously had a difficult few years. People are apparently cancelling bookings and shutting down much of their life this week. Even if there are apparently going to be some trains running, the unpredictability of it, the fact that even on non-strike days there's going to be a reduction in service, I think we can expect there to be a big downfall in economic activity as a result of these strikes.
Do you think that these unions are justified in pushing for industrial action, given that most of the country are facing the sharp end of a cost of living crisis? And what should the government be doing to tackle this?
Look, I mean, at a fundamental level, the economics of train transport don't really add up at the moment. The fact is, as a result of COVID, a lot of people's behaviours have changed. There's a lot fewer passengers than there were previously. Less passengers means less revenue, means that demanding big pay rises in that context doesn't really make sense. Something is going to have to give. You're going to have fewer staff, fewer trains, fewer lines. So something has to go down unless we want big subsidies from the taxpayer. It doesn't seem reasonable for the unions to not accept that reality and just to demand big fat pay rises despite all that economic change. At the same time, I mean, I'm not against the idea of unions striking. I think they should be free to withdraw their labour. But at the same time, people shouldn't be free of consequence if they withdraw their labour. I think companies should be free to sack staff who withdraw their labour. I think they should be free to bring in agency workers to replace that staff. I think there needs to be consequences for the unions if they're going to put such a burden on businesses and a burden on everyone else in society through their actions.
I mean, Britain is not alone in this. When you look around Europe, I think similar industrial action is taking place. But we do face a particularly steep backlog in certain areas. For example, when it comes to court cases, the waiting lists are enormous. And now we're hearing that legal aid-funded barristers are likely to also begin strike action. How much is this going to slow down every single element of this country? And, you know, is there a finger of blame that should be pointed at the government?
Well, look, I think there's many of your viewers might be happy about the idea of some barristers going on strike and fewer QCs tweeting their political opinions, but perhaps that's not exactly what we're going to see straight away. I mean, just back to that question there, I mean, it's hard to blame the government in the entirety. The fact is, there's not a limitless pot of money and there are limitless demands for government spending at the moment. Everyone wants a pay rise, everyone wants more money. Obviously, that's if they accept those pay rises, it's going to be quite costly to taxpayers, inevitably going to be paid with higher taxes or debt in the future, so delayed higher taxes. In the context of a cost of living crisis for many households, putting that kind of burden on the taxpayer is quite difficult and concerning. At the same time, you have to have some sympathy for people who do want to see their wages increase. So there's no perfectly good solution here in terms of the outcomes, and you do need to reach some kind of negotiated settlement inevitably with these kind of situations. But you've also got to think about reforms. What could be done to increase productivity for these services? Should we be having better pay for teachers who are more productive, who are harder working, who are higher quality? Should we be improving productivity by getting rid of, as Boris has talked about, getting rid of old-fashioned ticket sellers at every single train station? What can be done to ensure that you can pay, I suppose, fewer staff or more productive staff more, rather than it just being about above inflation or inflationary pay increases? Can we boost productivity in the public sector that could potentially justify higher pay?
Matthew Lesh, thank you ever so much, Head of Public Policy at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Well, joining me on the show now is former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. Peter, there'll be a lot of people out there who work in the private sector who have the opinion that, when people work in the public sector, by and large, their jobs are protected. They probably had that sort of comfort and cushioning of protection during the pandemic, that people in the private sector, too, are having to struggle to make ends meet. So why is it that their lives should be disrupted by those people who actually earn money off the back of the taxpayer?
Well, I worry that this is being rendered into a war between the public and the private sector, which is unfair as well as inaccurate. Remember, there are several train operating company staff going on strike. So those are private sector workers. They're going on strike because of a 10% real terms pay cut, and they're going on strike because of a government failure. So it's not just their behaviour is lawful and reasonable and rational, but this is also private sector workers coming together for the greater good.
There are people saying that if you just automatically cave into the demands and put up salaries to meet what is being asked for, then you're actually only going to increase inflation. And frankly, the government doesn't have a magic money tree from which to get this money.
Well, I would challenge you on that, because, first of all, train drivers, for example, they're working in the private sector, so it's not funding. The role of the government is they set the negotiating mandate, branch up to the Transport Secretary to get round the table, bring both sides together. He's chosen not to do that. But secondly, every train driver has a family like you or I. Their mums and dads, they've got to put food on the table, and if your pay is cut by 10% in real terms, that's much more difficult. So again, I think their behaviour is rational, and I worry the rhetoric is a little bit of a wartime rhetoric of holding people to ransom and a warfare and sitting off sides against each other. It seems completely uncontroversial that a worker who's gone 2 years through the pandemic with little or no pay rise would be willing to take a 10% pay cut.
Do you think, therefore, that, the headlines just play into the government's playbook of it's everyone else's fault and not ours?
Well, there is a lot of truth in that. So you have to bear in mind, first of all, the number of strike days has dropped by about 90% since the 1970s, and I'm a trade union, I've been on strike myself. You do that as a last resort, not as a first resort. Clearly, there's a sense that the government are relaxed about this, because it's not a typical Conservative government. It's a libertarian government that wants to set off bits of society against each other, exactly what we don't need after all the dramas over Brexit, and that's part of the culture war. But it's often been left out of the coverage that there can be a role for government if they choose to take it. The government could insult people going on strike, call them selfish, as it's happened, or they could try and bring both sides together through ACAS, the conciliation service, to get a better outcome for travellers who are people like me and you.
Peter Edwards, thank you so much. Always love having you on the show. Peter Edwards, who's the former editor of Labour List. Well, joining me as my presenter friend today throughout the show is Associate Editor, Political Editor, I should say, of The Telegraph, Christopher Hope. Look, I gave you a job boost there during the cost of living crisis. I saw you scribbling notes away in journalistic shorthand. What's on your mind about this?
Well, Peter then mentioned the war, and I think it's more like the 1980s. What the government is doing here is they see it as their miners' strike, the thing, a totemic battle between left and right, which many of us remember. There's TV programmes on at the moment and some dramatisation on BBC One about this. I think that's why they see it as a chance for a clear line to be drawn between Labour and the Tories, the way Labour are not really condemning the strikes in the same way as the Tories are saying, yes, and let's even change the rules to allow workers to come in on contracts and do the work of these in the public sector. So this is a government on election footing. The election could be as early as October next year, probably May 24. That's what's driving it. They're trying to find ways to be different and find a way to make people choose between Labour and the Tory party.
I mean, is there any justification in pointing the finger of blame at the government? Peter Edwards there saying the government could choose a role to try and sort this out. But they are actually trying to organise negotiations. Negotiations are ongoing, and yet the strike is happening anyway.
The government can't really get involved. It is basically between the employer, the rail delivery group, and the unions, and that's about it. I suppose there is a degree of people, will be concerned about this. Self-employed people, those watching this programme could be at home and can't get to work tomorrow and the rest of the week. And it will see, why are you going on strike now when you see how hard it is in the cost of living crisis? And the rail industry, does get billions a year from us in taxpayers. Hundreds of pounds per household is funding this industry, and it's really hard to see, where the justification comes from these big demands they're making.
It's interesting to see that barristers have now joined the fray. It's a sector that I've never seen go on strike before. But a lot of people out there don't realise that a lot of those working in criminal law, their starting salary is only £12,000, and they work very long hours, usually for less than minimum wage. But we have this huge courts backlog. Now, that is an area where you possibly could point to the government and say you made promises that you haven't fulfilled.
Yeah, the so-called Nightingale courts brought in by the former Justice Secretary were trying to have their courts set up everywhere across the country to try and lift this delay. There's all sorts of issues about courts, the bundles of paper, could that be done on an iPad, can you save time that way? Well, the concern is going to be this idea of the summer of discontent, as you describe it. If the weather's OK, maybe people can handle not being at work sometimes, but in the winter, it might get much more difficult.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It makes for sort of pretty spicy headlines, as you were saying, and it does sort of fold in nicely to the government's strategy of saying it's us versus them a little bit. But you do wonder, with a working from home culture, how much cut through this is actually going to have.
Well, it will be this week. Famously, the miners' strike in the 1980s didn't work out because they striked during the summer period, as far as I can remember, and that could be the part of the problem, that people think, well, I'll be at home and can just relax while the weather's good and can't go to work, or can work from home and not required at the office. So it's difficult. I feel sorry this week for exams, GCSEs end next week. A lot of children, they can't get to school. How will they be bussed in by schools? Less sorry for Glastonbury revelers. That's a lifetime choice. Lifetime which you may go, Alex, and go back to it. But I'm really feeling for the kids this week. They've had a hard time.
I would rather go to the seventh circle of hell. I've never been, but I don't really see myself in an overpriced teepee and Wellington boots surrounded by leftists.
Blimey.
Here with GB News on TV and radio. Coming up, President Macron has lost his parliamentary majority, but what does that mean for France as well as Europe? Time for a short break now and a check on the weather forecast.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGibbon from the Met Office. A fine day for most of us, plenty of sunshine for the vast majority, but there will be some cloud and rain affecting the far north, where a cold front is moving into the northwest of Scotland. Ahead of that, a ridge of high pressure, and the low that brought rain and showers during the weekend to southern areas is moving away into the Bay of Biscay. So a ridge of high pressure for many. Fine, sunny spells. For the vast majority, it's looking dry as well. Just some patchy cloud building up. Some fair weather cloud, really. And for the north and northwest of Scotland, thicker cloud here, along with some light outbreaks of rain, mainly for the Northern Isles and the northwest Highlands, I think. But elsewhere, well, 20 to 24 Celsius, so feeling pleasant enough in the sunshine. Into the evening, and the cloud and rain tends to sink south across northern Scotland, and then it reaches parts of Northern Ireland after midnight, as well as the central belts, but it tends to fizzle out by this stage, and mainly it's western coasts and hills that sees the most damp weather overnight. 13 Celsius for Scotland and Northern Ireland overnight, a milder night here because of the cloud cover. Further south across England and Wales, 8 or 9 for many, but low single figures possible for some sheltered southern areas where we've got light winds, and plenty of sunshine to start the day on Tuesday, and temperatures soon rising as a result. The cloud in the north tends to sink further south into northern England, and 1 or 2 showers will develop as skies brighten, mainly eastern Scotland, perhaps the odd one over the Pennines, for example. However, away from those areas, it's another dry and fine day, and again, wall-to-wall sunshine virtually for southern parts of the UK. Warming up as well over the next few days with that sunshine, and it looks like temperatures will peak on Thursday in the south, with 29 Celsius possible for much of England. Further north, it's cooler and cloudier.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
with honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, he may have comfortably won the presidential election, but Macron's administration could soon grind to a halt after his party lost their majority in the National Assembly this weekend, with record results at the extreme ends of the political spectrum. Like many other countries in the West, it seems the era of centrist politics is coming to a close. While on the face of it, voters might opt for the continuity candidate, underneath the surface is growing rebellion, with people rolling the dice in other elections, reflecting a world increasingly funneled into warring echo chambers, where the big questions posed by globalization are not being answered by world leaders. In an era where stability looks at stake, economically and geopolitically, politics is more unstable than ever before. Well, I'm joined by French journalist and columnist Anne-Elisabeth Moutet. Anne, fantastic to have you on the programme. How significant is this? I mean, a lot of people predicted that Macron would struggle in these elections. Has it actually taken France by shock a little bit to see these results?
It's a great surprise, and it's a great vote of no confidence in Macron, essentially because the people who voted for him in the presidential election 2 months ago, and now feels like a year ago, voted for him because they felt that what was on offer on the other side was not good enough. But they were bullied into that, and they felt this time that they didn't want to give him a majority so that he would realize that he didn't own the votes. And he didn't realize that he didn't own those votes until it was too late. He almost did not campaign. His candidates almost did not campaign. And the result has been disastrous for him because he now faces instability in the House. And he's not even sure that he's going to be able to build a coalition with the centre-right party, Les Républicains. Right now, they can ask for a lot to give him a majority, and that would possibly even mean the post of prime minister, even though they have far fewer MPs than he does. And then he's facing two blocks of equal size, almost, on one side the National Rally, and on the other side, not exactly the hard left, but the umbrella alliance between two-thirds hard left and one-third traditional left.
What's this going to mean for France? I mean, this is a country that, well, the way we see it in Britain, as soon as there's a bit of an economic crisis, they love burning a few tyres and having their grève, their industrial action. We all are very familiar with the Gilets jaunes. Is this fragmentation of French politics at operational level going to see, do you think, a lot of civil unrest poking its head above the parapet over the summer?
Well, not only civil unrest, but I think Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who's the most experienced of all the politicians on the field right now, who's a man who realized when he got this close to being in the second round of the presidential election, he realized that he didn't own all his votes, but he decided that with momentum, he could get them together. And he literally pushed people into this alliance because he said, this, you go separately and you're finished, or we go all together. And so he leveraged this into a real political clout. He himself was not even running for parliament, which doesn't matter because in France you can be in the cabinet without being in parliament. It's not necessary. And what he's promised is already a vote of no confidence on July the 5th. So, almost next in 2 weeks' time, and in which case, either, the question is, what do the other parties do? Do they vote no confidence in the government so soon? It probably is unlikely, but it's already going to sort of make life difficult for Macron, and they can do this again and again. And on the other side, you've got the Républicains. The Républicains will very probably start pushing for special measures, otherwise they won't do anything. He is prisoner now of the rest. And what Mélenchon is going to try to do is to bring the spirit of the Gilets jaunes inside the National Assembly. And I don't just mean the political points, I also mean the disruption, the shouting, the scuffles. It's going to be brutal politics in Parliament.
How will this affect Macron's image as a bit of the EU's pin-up boy? We've seen him a lot trying to talk big on the world stage. I think he fancies himself as putting France at the forefront, himself as the forefront, as a global negotiator. Is disruption back at home going to have an impact on that, do you think?
I do not know because, he's the elected president, but certainly it's going to undermine him. And it's going to undermine him in what, it's bringing the French presidency of the European Council to a close. It closes at the end of this month. He will be the lame duck president. And at the same time, he also tried to push through a text that would force all corporations within the EU to pay at least 15% tax. And that's something that's been scuppered at the last minute by Hungary. And so most of his plans, just like his domestic plans, most of his plans to make his mark on the European Union have collapsed. The other point being that, half the European Union nations, all the ones on the Eastern Bloc, are disappointed, and that's a kind word, with his equivocation on Ukraine. And he can say all he wants that he supports Ukraine, but then he says that channels must be open for Vladimir Putin. So I think he's actually going to leave rather the wrong impression. And the French presidency of the European Council, which he built up, it's not something so important, but he built it up as being practically the new president of the European Union. And that's also going to be a collapse. So essentially, again, internationally, it's not going to help him much.
And Elisabeth Moutet, thank you so much for coming on and explaining all of that to us. Chris, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, it's very easy, isn't it, to rub your hands together with glee when you see Macron laid a bit low electorally. But cooperation with France for the UK is extremely important as we carry on sort of wading our way through negotiations with the EU, and cooperation, of course, on things like the migrant crisis and getting them to help us stop these boats coming over the channel. Disruption in France isn't necessarily a good thing for us.
It's not a good thing, no, although, yeah, he doesn't go out of his way to be pleasant about Britain all the time, does he? But Ukraine, of course, don't forget that. We're cooperating on that and how that that might help in terms of dealing with the Russian threat. I think it's fascinating what's happening here. He basically hollowed out the middle ground with his En Marche party back in 2017. And then fast forward 5 years, he's forced opposition off to the extreme left and extreme right. And that's where the growth of support is. So he's now going to find 45 seats, 45 French MPs to support his coalition to try and govern. Already some policies are dying. Lifting the retirement age to 65, which, of course, we have in this country, now won't happen. In France, it's interesting how just in a few short weeks since that presidential victory, it's all going a bit pear-shaped for Macron.
Yeah, quel dommage, as they say across the channel. Chris, thank you. You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up, we're heading to Westminster, where the Home Secretary is expected to be speaking about government plans to send asylum seekers from the UK to Rwanda. Now, though, it's time for a check on the news headlines. Good afternoon, it is 2:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Downing Street says the government's not taking part in last-minute talks between unions and industry bosses ahead of this week's rail strikes. The industrial action will cause major travel disruption tomorrow, Thursday, on Saturday too. Unions are accusing the government of inflaming tensions in England, saying agreements have been reached with operators in Wales and meaningful talks are taking place in Scotland. The government insists the offer on the table is fair and reasonable pay rise. Heathrow Airport has asked airlines flying from Terminals 2 and 3 to cancel 10% of the scheduled flights that were supposed to take off today. Well, EasyJet have announced it's cutting more flights over the summer in response to a cap introduced by Gatwick, with a similar limit being imposed by Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. Energy companies will be prevented from charging high direct debits under plans put forward by the regulator Ofgem. The proposals also include rules to protect customers' credit balances and green levy payments if a company goes bust. Suppliers will also be required to have enough money to make sure they can weather future shocks. The new head of the British Army has warned that troops must be prepared to fight in Europe as the war in Ukraine continues. General Sir Patrick Sanders says it's imperative that the army's ready to fight and win wars on land. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Shortly, we'll be back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Now, on the face of it, Russia is struggling when it comes to the war in Ukraine. Sanctions are biting. Supply routes across Lithuania have been closed down. Their equipment is decrepit, and they're losing high-ranking generals in droves. But long, bitter periods of struggle and strife are second nature to Russia, and there's no sign of retreat anytime soon. Meanwhile, Finland and Sweden's accession to NATO is being stalled by Turkey. The EU's PR exercise of offering Ukraine membership will only stoke Putin's fury while being unachievable anytime soon. And Russia's tactic to create food shortages will help give them leverage beyond the West, while the energy crisis is seeing them get more money than before the invasion of Ukraine as prices soar, with useful old Beijing gobbling up any deficit left by European countries, resorting to reopening coal mines as economies flounder in post-pandemic pain. Anyone who didn't think Putin had priced in the lot of it is surely underestimating the Kremlin massively. Meanwhile, the new head of the British Army has told his troops they need to be prepared for the worst as war erupts on European soil once again. The new commander of the UK Army, General Sir Patrick Sanders, said to his forces they must be fighting fit to go to war with Russia. As Europe risks potentially falling into complacency, it can be certain one man won't. The question is, can anything stop Mad Vlad? Well, I'm delighted to say joining me on the show now is author of Red Notice, How I Became Putin's #1 Enemy, Bill Browder. Bill, what is your current assessment of the situation? We've spoken before. A lot has happened since then. It looks like this is going to drag out for a long time, but Putin's prepared to go to pretty extensive lengths, isn't he, to get leverage over the whole world, essentially?
Well, Putin is definitely not going to back down from this invasion. No matter what we do, he can't back down. The whole purpose of this invasion is like an invasion to distract the Russian people from their anger with him and to make them angry with a foreign enemy. And so for him, the war is the objective. People always ask me, what's the end game here? And the end game is being at war. And he also, as you rightly pointed out, doesn't have the same. He doesn't have to run for re-election because he's a dictator, and so, therefore he doesn't have to keep the Russian people happy. He can starve them. He can send them off into battle and make them cannon fodder, and none of that matters because he's a dictator. And so, effectively, he can experience great pain. And let me tell you, they're experiencing great pain. They've lost 30,000 soldiers. The economy is going into a massive recession, probably depression. They can't even find ink to put on the juice cartons. The whole place is in a terrible economic state. But he understands that he can inflict more pain on his people, even if it's 20 times greater than the pain we experience, because we're in democracies and we have elections all the time. And we could end up, because of high oil prices and high food prices, with some change in leadership where someone new comes in and says, wait a second, why don't we just throw our lot in with Putin? And that's what he's banking on. He's saying that time is on his side. It's not on the side of the West. And he's ready to suck up his gut and inflict lots of pain on his own people to get there.
Yeah, it's interesting. When Boris Johnson went back to Kiev recently to meet with President Zelensky again and urged Europe not to be complacent, with increasing noises coming out from other countries in the West that perhaps there should be some sort of peace agreement or a ceasefire, essentially, in part capitulation to Russia to end the pain, not just in Ukraine, but for their countries economically as well. And yet a lot of the rhetoric coming out of Russia, particularly from people like Medvedev, who was once an ally of the West, or seemingly painted that way, is increasingly quite extreme. Where do you think we're going to go from here? Are Russia going to up the ante?
Well, they're certainly going to up the ante with rhetoric. That's what they do all the time. They throw threats around like confetti. But what you have to understand about Putin and Russia is that these guys are just common thugs. And common thugs respond to force and strength. They don't respond to weakness. And so the German leader or Macron, any of these people who are busy saying that the Ukrainians should settle and give some territory and appease Putin, they don't understand what Putin is all about. And so what Putin will respect is a boot on the throat. If we have a boot on his throat, that's the one thing that will cause him to stop going forward. If we try to appease him, let me tell you, the next stop for him will be Poland or Estonia, at which point then we have to decide whether we really believe that we have a collective security arrangement with NATO. And there'll be a lot of people who say, why should we protect Poland, or why should we protect Estonia when Putin will be at war with us? And so I think we have to do everything possible to stop him where he is right now, which is Ukraine. And we should be very grateful to the Ukrainians who are losing thousands of troops every week, every month, fighting off Putin so that we don't have to.
I mean, I'm glad you said that, actually, because it strikes me that there was lots of headlines and a big noise made about Finland and Sweden joining NATO. That is currently in the reeds, it seems, as Turkey opposes it. And also Ukraine joining the EU. That is still to be ratified by member states. But even still, that's going to take a very long time. Do you think that, making these big headlines and making all the right noises might play well in the press back at home, but actually it's soccer to Putin when these things actually don't come to pass?
Well, I mean, I think that these are all, at the end of the day, we've watched this terrible war of aggression, this horrible, killing of civilians. And I think in the West, we're trying to do whatever we can to both strengthen ourselves, which is, and I think Finland and Sweden joining NATO is a good thing. And I don't think that Turkey is going to end up being the decisive factor there. And as far as the European Union goes, it'll probably take them 20 years, and that's fine. We should hold out whatever gifts we can give the Ukrainians for doing us a huge service, which is fighting off these evil people in Russia, these Putin troops that are going out there and raping and killing civilians. It's totally reasonable. But most importantly, and this is the key, at the moment we've given the Ukrainians enough military equipment not to lose the war. But they need enough military equipment to win the war, and we haven't gotten there yet. And it's really crucial that when Zelensky, president of Ukraine, asks for military equipment, that we give him everything he's asking for, because we'd rather have him, Zelensky and his troops, fight off the Russians than have to do it ourselves, and he's doing it for us.
Bill Browder, thank you ever so much. Always fantastic talking to you on the show. Let's catch up again very soon. Chris, what's your position on this? I think that there's a problem that we're becoming rather immunised against all of this. When you read the headlines, they're talking about filtration camps with Ukrainian refugees being sent to Russia and being made to sort of say and do certain things, stealing children, the war crimes, starving people. I mean, it's almost like it's become so common that we don't react with the same horror anymore. And that's the risk, isn't it?
It's a big risk, and that's why the reporting is so important from the Telegraph, where I work, and other newspapers, other media outlets, broadcast, GBNews. It's all important. Having someone like Bill Browder on there, who fought through the courts with Putin so bravely all those years when he's running his Hermitage company. A really brave guy there, I think, and he knows what Putin will do to try and get his own way. I think the risk is, of course, that it's less on the front page. We're inured to the suffering, and that can't be allowed. So it's really important. And that's why Boris Johnson going out last Friday was important to go and see Zelensky. He didn't manage it very well with his own MPs. He didn't tell the Northern Research Group he wasn't going to see them. But it really matters. I think he's right, of course. Browder's right to say that it is Ukrainian troops who are fighting, not our troops. But we're going back to the beginning of this kind of discussion. There really is a point that we have to start retraining our troops to fight this Russian menace. That's tank-based warfare, somewhere where we weren't during the defence review just last November. It's quite extraordinary how far we've come. Yeah,
it is. Chris, thank you ever so much. Well, the second major sports body to put their head above the water when it comes to trans athletes is FINA, the swimming world's governing body. They follow hot on the heels of World Rugby, which implemented a ban on transgender women playing in the women's game in 2021. Swimming has garnered the most attention recently when it comes to the question of whether once male athletes with evidently stronger and bigger physiques, hardly disguisable in the context of a swimming costume in a sport demanding power and stamina, should be able to compete against women. Bigger lungs, bigger shoulders, bigger advantage. Instead, swimming is set to introduce an open category and demands any trans athletes should not have gone through male puberty if they want to race against women. But this would require children who are keen swimmers making life-changing decisions on their bodies at a very young age. The policy has made inevitable waves. But with all the thrashing about, how many people does this impact really? Are Olympic-sized training pools filled with young athletes on hormone blockers? Or are we all drowning in the so-called culture wars? Well, joining me now on the show is diversity and inclusion facilitator Katie John Went. Katie John, fantastic to have you back on. What's been your reaction to this announcement?
Part of me is pleased because I'm glad that the sports bodies are making making a decision about some of these things. Even with bridges, they've doubled the length of time for cyclists, transgender cyclists as well now. But each sport is going at it individually, which is actually also a good thing because I think each sport will have different parameters for physical inclusion and physical advantage. So I'm glad that they're making a decision in one hand. It takes the kind of the decision making away from, say, the transgender athlete who's then having to, many of these transgender athletes are literally following the rules, but then actually coming a cropper because it's creating a very bad situation between athletes. I'm not so keen on, as you just pointed out, the fact that it's actually putting a pressure on people at the age of 12 to consider their future sports careers, which is going to the other extreme. But the best thing about it is that they're all beginning to think outside the box. And they're thinking outside the box in the sense of creating these open categories. And in the same way that in the past we've had, the male and female sports, but we've also had the Paralympics and we've also had the Out Games. Thinking outside the boxes, the simple male and female for some sports is a really good way to start being creative about how to do inclusion with and at the same time doing fairness.
Yeah, do you think that should set a precedent now for other sports to follow, whereby there are obviously striking physical differences proven by biological science between the male body and the female body, especially those who have gone through puberty, and actually wasn't the solution all along to come up with a third category and leave it open to people to, if they want to compete, be in that category, rather than get it all tied up with the ongoing culture wars, which really inflames tensions and creates lots of division?
Well, in many respects, it's been an obvious solution all along because it doesn't just solve the problem of transgender athletes. It also solves the problem of intersex athletes. You can go back over the last 10 years and look at the issues they've had with Caster Semenya and Dute Chand and various other intersex athletes who have had too much testosterone in their system whilst being, for example, a female athlete. And so that solves the problem for them as well. It solves the problem for people who might identify as non-binary. So we're actually solving non-binary, intersex and transgender all at the same time. And also potentially the people, Emily Bridges came podium first and another trans athlete podium second in an open category. And that picture and that scene went around the press thinking that she'd won a women's category. She'd actually won an open category. And there should be less issue then and less dispute around that as well. I'm transgender, but I actually grew up with a hormone disorder that meant I didn't get a male puberty until I was 18/19. And I'm 5'6", and I will lose every swimming race I guarantee I enter, whether it's the male, the female, or the open category. So it's not automatic that everyone born male is going to have huge advantage, but someone who is in elite sports will. And I think we've got to be realistic about that and not be precious about it.
Yeah, we love the fact you're realistic and never precious. Katie John Went, thank you so much for coming on the programme. Strikes mean getting anywhere is starting to feel like an expedition to the North Pole while a tank of petrol costs £1 million. But, it's actually a great opportunity to have a peek around your own backyard and boost British business during an economic turmoil. I bimbled off to Rye at the weekend for a lovely little day trip, just a hop, skip and a jump from the big smoke. I discovered a wonderful little town with a big personality steeped in history. If the pandemic taught us anything, is that there's lots to enjoy back in our own curious country. And if it leaves a lasting legacy, it's the chaos and cost of living horror we're faced with. So do your bits for Blighty, dear viewer. Get out there and enjoy the best of what we've got to offer. First, though, it's time for the Alex Agenda. No wonder airlines want to blame Brexit for the ongoing travel chaos affecting Britain and, I hasten to add, most of the world. They're mugging you off. Yes, they had a tough old time during the pandemic when travel ground to a halt, but they got pretty sizable bungs from governments to keep them going. From the Wall Street Journal to Reuters to Le Monde, airport chaos is being reported at almost every single major hub out there. Thousands of flights cancelled because carriers around the world let too many employees go during the pandemic. And now, conveniently, the chaos means ticket prices are surging at the fastest pace since 1981, which is great for their profits. So let's look at the facts, shall we? In Spain, police are being asked to hire 500 staff at the country's busiest airports. In Germany, 1/5 of jobs in security, check-in and ground handling are vacant, a shortfall of 2,000 workers. Parisian airports need to fill 4,000 jobs after more than 20,000 were laid off. While in America, almost 7,000 flights were scrapped Thursday and Friday alone and nearly 12,000 delayed. Brexit, my backside. But your pain will be their gain, something airline investors know all too well. Now, if there was ever an advert to train up a pretty gnarly Alsatian and rig up CCTV like Fort Knox, it's the fact police have failed to solve a single burglary in nearly half of the country's neighbourhoods in the past 3 years. 32,000 communities have been analysed, with 16,000 of them having all burglary cases closed without a suspect charged. What on earth are the police doing if they aren't catching people nicking things? The amount of doorbell cameras and tracking devices should make it easy. But that's the problem. Without that added help, most cops can't be bothered doing the grunt work anymore, with a lot of forces no longer even sending a detective to investigate. I've seen firsthand what happens when countries don't trust their cops and take matters into their own hands. And it's not pretty. The so-called progressive left are at it again when it comes to trans activists attacking a group of feminists who met in a pub to discuss women's rights. Big, burly, balaclava-clad blokes in black stormed the event yelling, "Suck my teeth," and demanding women go home to look after their kids. And these are the people who want to get into girls' changing rooms. Let's give the final word to my guest, Christopher Hope. Anything from that last little journey through the news you want to comment on?
I feel a bit sorry for the airlines. You're really harsh on them there, but I think it was so existential for flying, and it was like the COVID thing. So looking back now, it was manageable at the time. It felt quite a big threat, and it's quite hard to get people back it through trained up through security, and it's quite hard for them. They are making money,
but blaming Brexit, as one well-known airline has just done. And when it's happening all around the world, those sort of things make me mad.
I am sick of blaming Brexit. Brexit is meant to be an opportunity for those who want to grasp it. It's not a problem to be dealt with. It's an opportunity. Get with the programme.
Now, on the trans story, so we didn't speak about that after that in my programme. It is all part of the culture wars, isn't it? And are you getting a bit fed up with how much people are shouting and screaming about that? Or is this a really important conversation to be having?
It's important. It's a very small amount of people, but the idea of it is about being kind to everybody and trying to allow for all differences and respecting those. Of course, the problem is when that impacts on women's elite sport. And again, that's a small thing. There's been no actual issue of trans women winning there at all. So it's a question of were it to happen. But I think what we're hearing today is a degree of common sense returning to the debate.
And cops only solving half of burglaries.
I mean,
really worrying statistics. If your house gets robbed, you may as well not even phone them.
I mean, people can think that losing property is, well, I can buy a new thing, put a claim in, but they forget the feeling of being attacked, of someone else in your house who you don't know, taking your stuff. It can damage people for life. The sheer horror of that, and I think the police need to be tougher on it than they are.
Well, it turns out if it does end up in court, there are no barristers anyway at the moment. They're all going to go on strike. Christopher, thank you so much. You've been sending your emails in throughout the show today. Mike says, thinking about this strike and not accusing the RMT of being unreasonable, we all need a suitable living wage. Here in the Southwest, the average wage is well below the UK average. The point is, for years, there has been underinvestment in living standards. I believe we have one of the lowest state pensions in Europe. Susan says, it's a completely unjustified strike at this time with all that's happening here at home and Europe. The pay is not that bad for railway staff, and don't forget their inflation-proofed pensions. Michael says this rail strike, which is designed to cause the most damage and inconvenience in the middle of multiple crises, is another reason and a signal to the electorate why a Labour government is a bad idea. Pretty sure that's the message that Boris Johnson wants you to get. That's about it for now. Join me again for We Need to Talk About on GB News, same time, same place, 2 o'clock tomorrow. Big thanks to Christopher Hope joining me. We always love having him on. Coming up next, it's the briefing with Darren McCaffrey. First, though, it's time for a check on the weather forecast, and I think it's going to look pretty good for a lot of us. Fingers crossed.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A fine day for most of us, plenty of sunshine for the vast majority, but there will be some cloud and rain affecting the far north, where a cold front is moving into the northwest of Scotland. Ahead of that, a ridge of high pressure, and the low that brought rain and showers during the weekend to southern areas is moving away into the Bay of Biscay. So a ridge of high pressure for many. Fine, sunny spells. For the vast majority, it's looking dry as well. Just some patchy cloud building up. Some fair weather cloud, really. And for the north and northwest of Scotland, thicker cloud here, along with some light outbreaks of rain, mainly for the Northern Isles and the northwest Highlands, I think. But elsewhere, well, 20 to 24 Celsius, so feeling pleasant enough in the sunshine. Into the evening, and the cloud and rain tends to sink south across northern Scotland, and then it reaches parts of Northern Ireland after midnight, as well as the central belts, but it tends to fizzle out by this stage, and mainly it's western coasts and hills that sees the most damp weather overnight. 13 Celsius for Scotland and Northern Ireland overnight, a milder night here because of the cloud cover. Further south across England and Wales, 8 or 9 for many, but low single figures possible for some sheltered southern areas where we've got light winds and plenty of sunshine to start the day on Tuesday, and temperatures soon rising as a result. The cloud in the north tends to sink further south into northern England, and 1 or 2 showers will develop as skies brighten, mainly eastern Scotland, perhaps the odd one over the Pennines, for example. However, away from those areas, it's another dry and fine day, and again, wall-to-wall sunshine virtually for southern parts of the UK. Warming up as well over the next few days with that sunshine.